President, please be seated. The court is now in session today, and as the trial chamber scheduled and informed the concerned parties, the chamber continues to hear the testimony of the witness Himman, and when it's concluded, we'll hear testimony of another civil party, that is 2CCP 270. Ms. Sakabuti, please report the attendance of the parties and other individuals at today's proceedings. Gracias. Mr. President, for today's proceedings, all parties to this case are present. Mr. Nunchie is present in the holding cell downstairs. He has waived his right to be present in the courtroom. The waiver has been delivered to the greffier. The civil party who is to conclude his testimony today, that is Mr. Himman, is present and ready to be called by the chamber. The upcoming civil party, that is 2TCCP 270, is present and ready to be called by the chamber. Thank you. President, thank you, Ms. Sakabuti. The chamber now decides on the request by Nunchie. The chamber has received a waiver from Nunchie dated 28 September 2015, which states that due to his health, headache, back pain, he cannot sit or concentrate for long, and in order to effectively participate in future hearings, he requests to waive his right to participate in and be present at the 28 September 2015 hearing. He affirms that his counsel has advised him about the consequences of this waiver, that it cannot in any account be construed as a waiver of his rights to be tried fairly or to challenge evidence presented to or admitted by this court at any time during this trial. Having seen the medical report of Nunchie by the duty doctor for the accused at the ECCC, dated 28 September 2015, which notes that Nunchie has chronic back pain and dizziness when he sits for long, and recommends that the chamber grant him his request so that he can follow the proceedings remotely from the holding cell downstairs. Based on the above information and pursuant to Rule 81.5 of the ECCC internal rules, the chamber grants Nunchie his request to follow today's proceedings remotely from the holding cell downstairs via audio-visual means. The chamber instructs the AV unit personnel to link the proceedings to the room downstairs so that he can follow it, and this applies to the whole day. The chamber has just received a submission by the Office of the Co-Prosecutors to accept the disclosures of written records of interviews from cases 003 and 004 and place in the current case file pursuant to Rule 87.4. And the defense team for Kyu Sampon wishes to respond to that submission, and for that reason the chamber will give the floor to the defense team to make the oral response to the submission and request by the OCP before we proceed with hearing the testimony of the civil party. And defense counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to all of you. Maybe a point of clarification. What we requested in our email that we sent to the Chamber was not to answer orally, but the possibility of asking orally for a delay to provide this answer for two reasons. First of all, this request concerns only written statements that come from investigations that are in the process in cases 3 and 4. So this is a request that is directly connected with the request E363 that we made before the Chamber regarding the way that these documents coming from other investigations enter our trial gradually. So we would like to answer this request of the co-prosecutors once the Chamber has ruled on our own request E363. So that was the first aspect, the first part of our request. Of course, this request for delay is necessary because in our request, or in the request of the co-prosecutors E3270, they requested to include 25 witness statements, which is quite substantial. So aside from the clarifications that we're expecting from the Chamber, we need more time to be able to address these issues in depth. So we are asking, therefore, a delay given the elements that I have just brought up. So I hope I have been a little bit more clear about this.
Pour être précise,
To be more specific, we would like this delay to start once you notify us of your decision regarding request E363, which we filed yesterday. Thank you.
President, the International Deputy Co-Prosecutor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to all of you and to your honors. I note that this is a very limited request at this point in time. The idea is to postpone the answer to our request to admit 25 written records of interview. Despite everything, if we accept the request formulated by the Queue-Sampon defense team, it will be a little bit too late to use these written records of interview when necessary. That is to say, during the segment on the CHAM. Unless, and this is what we want, of course, the Chamber decides on the disclosures as soon as possible, which of course would solve the problem. But in the meantime, we believe that the parties should use all of the written records of interview that were disclosed a while ago already in order to put questions to the civil parties and to the witnesses. This is what the Nunchia defense and the Queue-Sampon defense has done in the past, in fact, without, however, placed on the case file a submission to use these written records or to put them into evidence based on Rule 87.4. And this is even more so useful. Among the written records that are the subject of our request E370, some are particularly important, some that are based on the statements of witnesses who will come to testify, even a witness who will testify this week or next week to TCW 950, or a witness that the Chamber wishes to hear proprium mutu. And this is to TCW 987, if I'm not mistaken. But beyond these issues, for the purposes of the ascertainment of the truth, it would be necessary for the parties to be able to refer to these documents, to quotes in these documents, in their examination of the witnesses who will come testify this week and in the following. Of course, once again, we hope that the Chamber will decide as soon as possible, which of course will allow us to solve this recurring problem, and that is taking up a lot of our time that is precious. That's all that we have to say with regard to this issue.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this speedy reply. First, I would like to use, or I'd like the words to be clear here. Today, we are placing an 87.4 request of documents and the prosecutor says that these documents are very important to the ascertainment of the truth, but if we're told that these documents were disclosed a few months ago, why then didn't the co-prosecutor make this request back then if it was so important? Second, I wish to remind, when we objected to the use of these documents, or when we asked for delays back then to review these documents, the Chamber said that it made a distinction between statements that had been disclosed simply and statements whose admission into evidence is being requested. So we're not going to oppose to the fact that there was a disclosure a few months ago, but apparently there's a distinction that is made between documents that are disclosed in an important number of folders and documents that are asked to be admitted into evidence. And third, I would like the co-prosecutors to provide us with the references, because they said that we used on several occasions statements from cases 3 and 4 in our examinations. But I'd like to remind you that the Queue de France defense's position has always been clear. When we are speaking about statements that are prior to the testimony of the person here before the court, there's no objection, because that is part of the examination of this witness's credibility. So there is, however, with regard to witnesses who are not going to testify but who are alive and who are not asked to testify before the court, yes, indeed, we object on a systematic basis to the usage of related documents. So these are clarifications that I wish to provide in my response.
President, thank you. And the Chamber wishes to inform the parties that the submission made by the defense team for case in point, that is document E363, is being considered by the Chamber, and the Chamber is confident that it will provide a response to that submission very soon, so that all the matters can be clear to all the parties concerned. We understand we all are trying our best to proceed in a way that is expeditious, and the Chamber will also respond to the request made by the co-prosecutors in force. Let me now hear the remaining testimony of the civil party Himon, and court officer, please usher the civil party into the courtroom. Thank you.
Excusez-moi, Monsieur le Président.
I apologize, Mr. President. Just for the purposes of clarification, so must I understand that you will rule on my request for delay later on? Please, can I be clear about this?
Yes, that is correct. The decision is not yet made. We are deliberating your request, that is document E363. And the decision will be issued soon. This is our response that will be issued to you soon, and the Chamber at the same time considering the submission made by the co-prosecutors. It would be nice for everyone if we can issue decisions on the two submissions, one by your team and another one by the co-prosecutors, although its nature is rather complicated, and we will try our best to issue our decision in due course, and it will be soon, as this is to deal with the practical matter before us. President, good morning, Mr. Himman. Are you ready? And the Chamber will give the floor to the defense teams to put the questions to you. First, the defense team for Nuon Chea. And Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, Counsel. Good morning, Mr. Witness. I have a few questions that I would like to put to you this morning, following up your testimony of 2 weeks ago. Let me first ask you some questions in relation to events in 1975, not in your village, but a little further down the river in Kopal. You asked a question about this, spoke briefly about the rebellion in Kopal. You also spoke about the rebellion to Iva Osman. You have been quoted in his book, Mr. President, that is E3/9336, English ERN 00218503, French 00286655, and Khmer 00218496. And Mr. Witness, you talked about the rebellion being crushed in 1975 by the use of artillery and Marines, boats from the Marines. Who told you this? Do you remember?
While I was in the village, I heard people talking about it. The rumor spread among the villagers in the village where I was living at the time about that event. And I heard about it.
ប៉ុណ្ណឹង
That is all.
And do you remember who told you about the use of marines and artillery to quote unquote smash the village?
I heard the villagers talking about it, but I cannot recall who actually said that. I was busy working in order to survive. I was striving hard to work at the time, and while I was working, I overheard people talking about this.
This all happened in what is called the East Zone, Sector 21. When people talk to you about the crushing of this rebellion, did they speak about which kind of forces crushed that rebellion? Were these district forces or rather forces from the sector or the zone?
At that time, I heard about the so-called Khmer Rouge, although I was not sure as to who they were referring to. As I stated earlier, I was busy working and I only overheard people talking about this.
Very well, Mr. Witness. You also answered a question 2 weeks ago about a rumor being spread that, quote unquote, the Khmer Rouge considered the Cham to be the enemy number one. Was it indeed a rumor, something that villagers told each other, or was it more than that?
The villagers talked about it, and I only heard them talking about it while I was working. And later on, after I heard about it, I heard about the event connected to the Cham people, but as I stressed, I only heard people talking about it, and I cannot recall as who were talking about this. I didn't dare look at the faces of those people, and I concentrated on my work.
Mr. Witness, I'm asking you this question because in that same book from Eva Osman that I just referred to, you are being cited by saying that the fact that the Cham were the enemy number one was announced in the villages. Am I now to understand that this wasn't some announcement, but it was just what villagers were telling each other? Is that correct?
President, Mr. Civil Party, please hold on. And the National Political Lawyer for Civil Parties, you have the floor. Mr. President, I am not objecting to this question, but please instruct the defense team for Nunchi to provide the document number and relevant EIN numbers.
No problem, Mr. Civil Party Lawyer. It's, as I said, the same excerpt. It's English page 153 on the bottom. The EIN is 00218503. French 002 86655 and Khmer 00218496. It says, and I quote, in 74 they pressured...
President, Defense Counsel, please hold on. There is no French translation through the channel. Please check it. Council Copper, please continue and please repeat the document and the relevant EIN numbers.
Yes, Mr. President, as said, it is the book of Eva Osman, E3/9336, on the bottom of page 153, English EIN 00218502, Khmer 00218496, and French 002 86655, and the quote reads as follows: in 1974 they pressured us even more. They announced that the charm was quote unquote enemy number 1. Khmer enemy was enemy number 2. So my question again, Mr. Civil Party, is it correct that it was something that the villagers were saying among each other, or was it rather something that was announced? So which one of the two is it?
Answer. Concerning Jam enemy, at that time the village chief was also a Jam person. His name was Tam. During the meeting at that time, I was not there in the meeting. I was digging up the dirt. I was in the village. I learned the information from Tam, the village chief, who was the one who made the announcement that Jam enemy was the first in the list. That is why at that time we heard about Jam enemies. Why I heard about this? Because at that time the Gokpal was referred to as God's Pass, because they were afraid that there would be a rebellion at Gokpal. So once again, Jam people were referred to as the first enemy in the list.
Mr. Witness, assuming for a second that your hearsay information is correct, why would Tum, who himself was a Cham, say that the Cham were enemy number 1?
Answer. I am also doubtful why Cham people was considered the number 1 enemy. I am in doubt as of now. I do not know why they referred to Cham people as the number 1 enemy, and later on I noticed that Cham people were taken away and killed, including me.
I will get back to that a little bit later, Mr. Witness. You also testified as to you and others being forced to eat pork. You said that happened in 75, 76. Can you explain to us how that went? How were people, Cham people, forced against their will to eat pork? Was there enough pork meat around to force Cham people to eat this, or was there not enough fish from the Mekong River? Can you explain to me a little bit how that went, this forcing?
Answer. During the period, Cham people were forced to eat pork. Religion was abolished, and we were prohibited from praying, worship. Pork was given to all of us to eat, and we were told to cut our hair short and to become one nation, that is Khmer nation. No other nations were allowed to be in the country. There was only one Khmer nation. We were told to cut our hairs or to have our haircuts. We were prohibited from praying, from worship. All this is what I have known. Later on, the situation became worse. There were no needs to have guards at the kitchen. The people were working very hard to gain favor from Khmer Rouge, so no need guards to guard the place, the kitchen, and people, even Cham themselves, would report on other Cham. From time to time, Cham families were taken away one after another. So people in the regime were trying to gain a favor from Cham people. They wanted to be considered loyal people by the Khmer Rouge, and at that time, as I have told you, Cham families would disappear one after another. I do not know the reason why they disappeared.
Thank you for your very long answer, Mr. Witness, but I would like to focus on one particular point. You said that the village chief was Cham himself. Your village is right on the Mekong River, which is full of fish, as we all know. There's a lot of evidence suggesting there was not enough to eat. So can you give me one example where you witnessed yourself a Cham being forced against his or her will to eat pork? When did this happen? Where were you? Can you give me a concrete example, please?
Answer. I was within group of people. If I refused to eat pork, I was afraid that the bullet would be shot. I would be shot, or I would be bitten. So it applies to other people. If we refused to eat pork, we would risk our lives. We had to eat pork. There were lots of fish, but we were forced to eat pork since they said there was only one Khmer nation during the time.
Is my understanding correct that you didn't actually witness somebody being physically forced to eat pork, but it was rather a general fear? by not eating pork you would somehow violate rules? Is that how I should understand your testimony?
Answer. I agreed to what you said. There was an announcement that if one refused eating pork, that person would be considered opposing on they had to eat pork while weeping to save their own lives.
I still have some questions on this topic, but I'll move on because of time, Mr. Witness. Let me now go to 1977, and more particularly to what you call the second lunar month, when you married another Cham girl, your present wife. Just to be sure, second lunar month in 77, would that be February 77? Mr. President, I heard there was no Khmer translation.
President, is there any problem with translation system? President, you may now resume your questioning, Copper, because there was a glitch in the system a while ago.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will repeat my question, Mr. Witness. And that is, my question was about the marriage, your wedding to your present wife, also a Cham woman. You testified that you married her in the second lunar month of 1977. Would that be February 77?
Answer. Concerning my marriage, it happened a long time ago. I am quite old now. I may not recall it well. I recalled that I got married in the Pol Pot time.
Is it correct that when you got married to your present wife, you were married together with 50 other couples at a ceremony at Wat Otrakun?
Answer, yes, that is correct. It was not only me and my wife who were in the meeting. Perhaps there were 50 couples at the time, including my wife and me. And we were forced to eat pork during the ceremony.
I'll get back to that maybe. Do you recall, Mr. Witness, whether there were Cham among these other 50 couples that got married at Wat Otrakun?
Answer, I was there in the marriage ceremony. Other people as well were in the ceremony, wedding ceremony. I do not recall all the names.
I understand, but were there also Cham who got married Cham among the 50 couples?
Miên.
Answer: yes. There were Cham people, and I also was there in the marriage ceremony. My relatives were also there, and Khmer people were also in the marriage ceremony.
And do you recall how many of the couples were Cham and how many of the 50 couples were Khmer?
Answer: I cannot recall it, Mr. Lawyer. I only recalled that there was a marriage at that time, and I do not know how many couples were there in the marriage. I do not have the full detail of the information. There may have been around 50 couples in the marriage.
And do you recall whether Cham women were marrying Cham men and Khmer women were marrying Khmer men? Do you recall that?
Cái ơi châu Khmer.
Answer: we were advised to become Khmer nation. I do not know how they paired me with my wife. My wife was actually my fiancée. And there was another Cham person who was paired up with a Khmer girl who was his or her fiancée at the time.
Were you, when marrying together with the other 50 couples, were you at the site within the compound of Wat Otakun? And if yes, where were you exactly?
Answer: the marriage took place within the compound of Otakun Pagoda. The venue was located to the west of the pagoda, behind the pagoda, from my recollection.
And did you reach that point by going around the pagoda or going through the compound of the pagoda?
Answer: I went directly to the table which were laid at that place. I did not go or wander around because I was afraid of that time. Because I was afraid at that time. If I happened to wander around, they would accuse me this or that. So I went directly to the table, already laid for everyone.
When you're approaching Wat Otakun with the river in your back, you can go straight, taking the main entrance, or you can go around eastwards. Do you recall which route you took? to get to the ceremony?
Answer. I do not recall it well because it happened a long time ago. I am sure that I was told to attend the wedding ceremony at Otokun Pagoda. I did not know which way I used at that time, which road I was traveling through at that time. I am quite old now. Even you can see my teeth. I have no more teeth, only a few.
When you were on the compound of Wat Otrakun, were you able to see the temple, the big building on the left side when you enter the main entrance?
Answer. I never climbed up into the temple. At that time, I went directly to the venue, to the table laid for couples to get married. So everyone were heading to the tables, and we were paired up. No one climbed up into the temple. It happened a long time ago. I cannot recall it well, but all I could remember is that I was there attending the marriage ceremony.
Do you recall hearing at that time in 77 whether there were any prisoners being kept in the building of the temple on the compound of the pagoda?
Answer. There was a rumor around that there were chains, there were shackles within the compound of pagoda. And this is what I have heard. I myself did not go and see whether there were actually chains and shackles. So I heard the rumor around. So I was afraid in light of that rumor.
Do you recall whether in 77 when you got married and the years subsequently there was a security parameter around the compound of Wat Otrakun?
Answer. I myself did not go and see. I heard the rumor, and in light of this, I was in fear. I did not dare to wander around. I was focusing on my work. No one did dare to enter that pagoda at that time. After we heard something's wrong, we would feel afraid. We heard from others about the matter.
Let me read something to you, Mr. Witness, something that another witness testified to in this chamber, in this room. Um, uh, Mr. President, that's the testimony of Tai Kum Hun. His testimony on the 16th of September 2015 at around 14:32. I'm asking a question. The question is as follows. So there was a perimeter of 700 to 800 meters around the pagoda where people were not allowed to come. But was there an extra parameter in such a way that they, as you said, did not allow people to live in the village? And then the witness answers, you meant outside the premises of the pagoda? If you talk about the external parameter of the pagoda, it means actually the parameter of the premises of the pagoda reached the riverbank, and that area was also restricted. So allow me to clarify, to the north of the pagoda was the riverfront, and to the south was a pond. And then a little further down he says, and I quote, all I know was that from the riverbank up to the compound of the pagoda, that area was not allowed to walk or trespass into. Mr. Witness, this witness seems to say that from the pagoda all the way down to the river was a restricted area where people couldn't come. Is that your recollection as well?
Answer. I was living in Saixo village at that time. I heard about what you have just said, the restricted area. No one dared to walk through or past that restricted area. No people were courageous enough to walk through that restricted location.
Do you recall how far apart the external borders of the perimeter were? Did they stretch from the compound of the pagoda all the way to the river? Or was the perimeter even bigger than that?
Answer. I have no idea, lawyer. I have told you already what I know. As I said, in light of the rumor, everyone was afraid to go close to the restricted area.
Let me move on to what you testified to 2 weeks ago about you walking in a parade of arrested Cham. You escaped together with your wife, and then you hid 100 meters away from the pagoda. Now, can you tell me exactly where you were? Because that's still unclear to me. Where were you when you have the pagoda in your back? Where were you exactly when you heard people screaming, allegedly while they're being killed?
Answer. I was to the east of the pits. From my estimates, the distance from the pits and the place where I was hiding was about 100 meters. For this reason, I could hear the screaming.
And what was exactly 100 meters to the east of the pagoda? What was there that allowed you to hide?
Answer, there were bushes, small bushes. I was hiding in the bush where I could hear the screaming. Oh Allah. And from there I could say it was about 100 meters away from the pits. I was afraid, I was concerned of my life, so I did not pay any attention to other matters.
Can you give us an estimate as to how far you were away from the river, the Mekong River?
I can only give you an estimate. It was about half kilometer from where I was hiding. So roughly it's about 500 meters.
And how far were you from the road that is eastward from the pagoda? The road that is directly on the east side of the pagoda. How far were you?
Are you talking about the road to the on the east side of the pagoda? If that is the case, I think the distance is quite similar from where I was hiding. So from the pond I was hiding to that location is about 1 kilometer. This is a rough estimate only.
What is exactly 1 kilometer? Can you be a little more specific?
The rough estimate is about 1 kilometer. Of course, I did not have any tool to take any real actual measure of the distance.
But what is 1 kilometer away? Is that the pond where you were hiding? 1 kilometer away from the river? Or 1 kilometer away from the pagoda?
The distance is from the pond that I was hiding to the Mekong River bank. So let's say it's about 1,000 meters.
So then the pond must be about half the distance, 500 meters away from Wat Otrakoon. Is that correct?
I am unsure since I can only give you an estimate. and I do not know the distance from where I was hiding to the pagoda.
But we're talking about the same pond that you referred to in your testimony 2 weeks ago, when you said Khmer Rouge troops fired, quote unquote, M79, B40, and AK rifle bullets at me in the pond. That's the same pond where you were fired upon by heavy artillery. Is that correct?
The Khmer Rouge fired at the pond where I was hiding. They fire many shots into the pond, and they also fired the M79. I was hiding in the water in the pond the whole day that day, and I only heard the sounds of bullets being fired into the pond. And by nightfall, they actually surrounded the pond. And actually, next morning, they had many villagers coming to storm over the shallow part of the pond. And that happened next morning. That is after they guarded the pond overnight. However, I was laying under the water that day.
But were they firing shots only at you, or were there other people in that pond as well?
In the pond, there were only my wife and I, and there was nobody else. And of course, you can imagine they actually fired into the pond in order to kill me, but luckily we were not hit.
How is it, Mr. Witness, that you know that they fired M79 and B40 ammunition at you? How is it that you found out that that happened when you were hiding for 3 months and 29 days?
I did not see the bullets. However, I heard the loud noise of B40 being fired, and from the sound, I could say it was a B40, and the same thing applies to the M79. When I heard pop, pop, and then loud noise, I knew that it was the sound of M79 being fired. Also, the sound from AK-47 is different from the sound of M79 or B40. I lived through the wartime period, and I could distinguish the different sounds from different guns or bullets being fired.
So all this heavy artillery was used to get only you and your wife out of the swamp or the pond. Is that correct?
It is very difficult for me to respond to your question. I didn't know of their intention, but from what I knew, they fired upon us in the pond. I heard they came to fight at the pond, and that Cham people were being considered enemy number one. And I did not know the motive behind their actions. However, before they fired upon us, I heard they accused the Cham people as their enemy number one, and of course I was one of the Cham people living in the area.
But what you're describing, you said must have taken place somewhere in the middle of 77, whereas the Cham being enemy number one was something you heard in 75 or 76. Was there a connection?
As I stated, I do not recall the date or the year, but while I was in Satso village, I heard them talking about that. I cannot specify the year.
Vậy đã kiện đã.
And for me, I am not really sure at all about the date or the year, and let me stress that again and again. But I did hear they say Cham people was their enemy, number one enemy. President, thank you, Council, and thank you, Civil Party. It is now time for us to have a short break. We take a break now and resume at 10:30. Court officer, please assist the Civil Party during the break time at the room for civil parties and witnesses, and have him return to attend the proceedings again at 10:30.
Trên cầu trường.